Heidi ho. Reading through a book by Bart Ehrman, Jesus Interrupted, and I always feel a bit schizophrenic when I read Bart Ehrman because he'll spend a lot of time describing really good evidence for Christianity with more or less, solid scholarship, and then he'll draw the conclusion based on that evidence that it's totally unreliable and we can't trust the Bible or the Christian faith at all. It seems as though he, as a Christian, before becoming an agnostic, that he wanted to view the Bible as having been faxed directly from heaven yesterday. And then when he went to seminary, he found out that it wasn't. Um, so it just seems like he had kind of a too extreme of a view of inerrancy, and he still does. It seems uh, where it's really a more nuanced kind of thing. At any rate, the one chapter in here that caught my attention when I first saw the book at the library is chapter 5, Liar, Lunatic, or Lord, Finding the Historical Jesus. That's chapter 5. And that's interesting because the trilemma, as it's sometimes called, was proposed by one of my favorite apologists, my favorite author of all time, C.S. Lewis, and it was later taken up by Josh McDowell. So I think that that was kind of one of the first arguments that I came across for Christian apologetics. So it really caught my attention. Now, I don't think that Bart really gives it a fair hearing in chapter 5, but what he does do in chapter 5 is talk about the historical Jesus. So we have a skeptical person, a person who does not believe in God. He's an agnostic. He doesn't believe Jesus rose from the dead or is divine. And yet, as a New Testament scholar, he can recognize that yes, there is evidence that Jesus, as he would say, probably did um, actually exist. There really was a man named Jesus. So I just wanted to read you a couple passages from this chapter. So it's not, evangelical propaganda. It's not something that a Bible thumper is saying. This is a respected New Testament critic, New Testament scholar, Bart Ehrman, not a believer, but he does believe in the historical Jesus. It says, a couple of years ago, I started receiving some very peculiar email messages from Sweden. I had never been to Sweden, and these were people I had never met elsewhere. They all wanted to know if it was true that I thought Jesus never existed. I thought this was an odd question. Several years ago I had written a book about the historical Jesus, indicating what ancient sources give us information about his life, and outlining what I thought we could say about the things he said and did. Not only did I think there was a historical Jesus, I also thought we could make historically credible statements about him. Why, then, was I being asked if it was true that I thought he never existed? These emails were not aggressive attempts to convince me that he had existed, just the opposite. These people did not believe he had existed and had heard that I, as a New Testament scholar, lent my support to their view. This view may seem strange to an American audience, where the majority of people think that Jesus is a completely fabricated figure, I'm sorry, this may seem strange to an American audience where the majority of people think not only that Jesus existed, but that he was and is the Son of God. But in parts of Scandinavia, the majority of people think that Jesus is a completely fabricated figure, that he never actually existed, but was invented by a group of people intent on starting a new religion. After puzzling for some weeks over why anyone would put me in this camp, I came to realize what the source of the confusion was: a misinterpretation of an article that had been written about me in the Washington Post in March 2006. He goes on to explain that in a lecture he was talking about the trilemma of Lewis: Lord, liar, lunatic. Jesus has to be one of the three, said Lewis, and he's not a liar or a lunatic. So what Ehrman said at this time in this interview um, was that it's a false trilemma. Jesus doesn't have to be Lord. In fact, he is a legend. But then he goes on to qualify that by saying he's not a legend in the sense that he never really existed, but he's a legend in the sense that certain things that people say that are Christians about Jesus are legendary. In other words, um, there is a historical core there. It has accreted various mythological embellishments, if you will, but in fact, Jesus, as a human being, as a person, did exist, and people did believe that he was raised from the dead. People that were followers of his at that time. All right, so the important point here is that, yes, historically speaking, even if we don't believe in the resurrection, even if we don't believe in God, we can still say, contrary to what some people have said, I think of Bertrand Russell, for example, and Why I'm Not a Christian. People more recently have made this claim that Jesus probably didn't even exist. That is simply a false, ludicrous, ridiculous statement. Ehrman lends his support to that it is a ridiculous statement. Now, one of the things that he says later on in the chapter, which I think is helpful as well, is he talks about the passage in Josephus, which talks about Jesus. Now, this is a source which people will say that Christians, in copying Josephus, who was not a Christian, they've added their own embellishments to it. And that is true, that apparently the people copying this kind of doctored up the text a little bit to make it be more orthodox, um, more sympathetic, if you will, to Jesus. But the fact remains, as Bart correctly points out, that Josephus really did himself talk about Jesus. So that is a source outside of the New Testament that does mention Jesus. It's a historical, non-Christian source uh, that mentions Jesus as a historical person. So here is the passage from Antiquities 18.3.3 of Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews. At this time, and this is being quoted in Jesus Interrupted, at this time there appeared Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one should call him a man, for he was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of people who received the truth with pleasure, and he gained a following both among many Jews and among many of Greek origin. He was the Messiah, and when Pilate, because of an accusation made by the healing men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who had loved him previously did not cease to do so, for he appeared to them on the third day living again, just as the divine prophets had spoken of these and countless other wondrous things about him. and up until this very day, the tribe of Christians named after him has not died out. So that's the passage as we have it today, and then Ehrman takes out the embellished parts uh, to leave this. So this is what Josephus actually had written. At this time there appeared Jesus, a wise man. He was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of people who received the truth with pleasure, and he gained a following both among many Jews and among many of Greek origin. And when Pilate, because of an accusation made by the leading men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who had loved him previously did not cease to do so, and up until this very day, the tribe of Christians named after him has not died out. So it's not as uh, robust Christologically as we would like it. It's not as Christian in sound as the original, or as in the passage as we have it today, but it does clearly speak of a historical Jesus. So when people say that Christians, added this passage to Josephus, that's not true. Bart Ehrman clearly recognizes that, and he's right to recognize that. But, and again, he's not a Christian. He's anti-Christian, I suppose, an agnostic at the very least. And some of his comments do seem to be contrary to Christian orthodoxy, kind of attacking it, if you will. But he recognizes that, yes, it's false to say that Christians added the passage. Rather, they did amend it, they did doctor it up a bit, but it does speak of a historical Jesus known by Josephus, a non-Christian historian, and about the time that Jesus lived. So the New Testament is not all we have that speaks of Jesus from history. We also have at least one other source, namely Josephus. Alright, so yes, there is a historical Jesus. It's beyond dispute. So people that say otherwise are misinformed. And again, this is coming not from a Christian proselytizer, not from a propagandist. It's coming from a skeptic, a apostate, a former Christian, Bart D. Ehrman. Thank you. Shalom.